We just had some technical issues. Actually, that's not the right font that I was using, but anyway, let's just hope that everything goes well, because some stuff just didn't work. So in case you didn't know, that's actually Coniolingus. That's my pet octopus, and he's usually around when I do presentations, and sometimes he's having a guest role, and sometimes not. So let's see how that goes. But he'll just assist me. Anyway. So just a few words about me, because some of you might not know me already. What I've been doing so far, currently I'm working as an international SEO senior manager with the Au Féminin group. So that's a magazine for women, an online magazine, and also we got another magazine for medical issues people can have. And we're working internationally in, actually I have not counted them, I guess more than 10 different countries. And I'm doing the technical SEO and also, well, working with the international SEO team. In each country there's another SEO assisting the editors and the sales team. So before we dive in, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Who of you has already implemented the hreflang annotation? Can you show me your hands? Okay, that's a few people. And who of you has not yet implemented the hreflang? It's not that many. Okay, that's a good thing. Here's why I was asking. A few days ago, I spoke about you guys with a friend, because I've already done this as a webinar. Some of you might have seen the webinar, but there were not so many attendees. Is anyone here who has seen my webinar with Searchmetrics? Yeah, right, okay. But apart from Björn, I guess not. Okay, that's good, and that might be new. I was covering the top 10 common hreflang mistakes, and I was actually promising to do this in further detail today. But the webinar was like 60 minutes, and today I've got like 30 minutes. So actually, going through 96 slides today is probably not going to work out. So my friend was saying, you're making things too complicated. So he had a hypothesis. Most people here in the audience might have monolingual websites and not thinking about implementing the hreflang, or have other issues. So who of you thinks that way? Is there anyone who's having a monolingual website? It's not so many. Anyway, I'm still going to cover this. So before we dive in, I just very quickly go through what is the hreflang. Basically, it's a hyperlink reference for a specific language or region, so you can target your websites to a specific language or region. Here's what it looks like. Just very quickly, you can see, where's this thingy? Here you can see the annotation, so you have the FR for the language, French, CH for Switzerland, so French Switzerland. You can see it's Zalando. So they mark this up. The markup should always look similar to this, but we'll cover this in a bit. Why would you use it? So most of you already know, because you've already done this for some reason. Content language is one of the many, many aspects, but it's one of the aspects to determine how relevant a website's content is to a search query, especially if people are looking in a different language or a specific region. And it can be used to uniquely assign your content to a language or region, or both. If any one of you needs further information because you have not already implemented it, here's some stuff, so you can click those when you get the presentation afterwards. Anyway, let's come back to my friend. So after we spoke, I tried to figure out the main scenarios that might be relevant for the audience, given that most of you have already implemented it. Not all of them might be as relevant to you, but some might. I cannot promise I can go through all of these scenarios in further detail today, but let's just cover the main thing. One of the scenarios might be you have a monolingual website, but your visitors might come from different countries within the same language, and you haven't thought about implementing the hreflang. Second, your pages got different versions in another language, but the structure of those pages might be very different. I'll show you an example in a bit. Or third, your website is just large. You got millions of URLs, and you've got a lot of fluctuation with some languages. Just imagine you've got an online shop for socks. And you've got it in Germany, France, and Italy, but in France, your products ran out of stock. So your hreflang is pointing to a 404, and you don't want that to happen. So what can you do about that? Yeah, so let's address the first reason. Do you need this at all? when you have a monolingual website. So basically, if you go into your analytics, like Google Analytics, WebTrack, Omniture, whatever you're using, it can be very well worth to look into where people addressing your website come from. So if you've got an English website hosted in the UK, there might still be people coming from Australia or New Zealand or the United States. And if they do, then it might be worth thinking about in an internationalization if you can ship to those countries, though. So it can make sense for brands with visitors from different countries, or shops if you have different currencies, if the shipping costs are different, if the terms and conditions are different. So then it might very well be worth doing that. So you can see here, it's this thing. That's markup for Great Britain and Canada. If you can ship to both countries, it might very well be worth targeting both of them. But for this to happen, it's very important that you have proper URL structure for targeting. So you can have subfolders for each country. You can have a ccTLD, meaning a country top-level domain, like .co.uk, but for each country, .fr, .it, etc. Or you can have a subdomain. We can't go into the strategy when some of those make sense and when some of these don't. You can use all of them with the hreflang, but some might be technically more difficult than others. So if you've got questions about these afterwards, I'll be happy to answer them, either in private or here. Still, that's something you have to consider. You can't really target different regions if you've got only one ccTLD, like UK, then you can't really target people from New Zealand. If you've got different structures on multilingual websites, so let's say you've got everything are hosted under a .com website, like tentacles.com, then, and you serve content in different languages, you might still think about a certain domain structure. You can use geotargeting in Google Search Console. For example, if you've got subfolders for each country, you could do IP-based rerouting. Some people do. It's not a good idea, because Googlebot might not have the same IP when crawling your website. So it might. That was actually an issue Netflix had. So they are serving different content based on your IP to different people. But if Googlebot is only crawling from, let's say, a United States server, then actually it does not really work so well. They will only ever see the United States site. Anyway, when it comes to URL structure, we already covered this briefly, so it would work with all of those. That is Deutsche Welle. I've been consulting them a few years back. So basically, this is an example for well, you've got content, it's both about Zimbabwe and about what recently happened, but the content is different in structure. So what you've got here, you've got a headline, an introduction, and a video on the German side. On the side for the UK, you've got a headline, introduction, and you've got images and description. You click through them. I don't know if you can see this. It's very small, but you can click through all those pictures, and you've got a specific description for each picture. So this content is kind of different. You can still use the hreflang. So it really depends on how much different it is. And if it's still targeting the same people, it can very well make sense to have a different structure. You don't have to have a word-by-word translation. When you come to this, there was recently a question asked to Google Webmasters. If you have well, if you have like sub-regions you want to target, sub-regions from a certain part of a continent or a part of a big country, they were asking if you can do this, because there are ways to use the markup, and usually they suggest this one. But they were asking if you can do this because it's actually targeting sub-regions, and they say, well, why would you do it? I have only tried this once with a sub-region, and it has worked so far, but you really have to test this. From my point of view, there's no reason, apart from Google not understanding it. So you really have to test it. But in theory, it can very well be well, worth trying it. Anyway, let's make the list. Usually, I've got a a playlist on Spotify for this. But I can't play them today because there's not much time. So I just quickly go through all of these. But anyway, if you're interested, if you look it up, Get It Right Internationally, you'll find the playlist for today's talk. Anyway, the top 10 mistakes. I can't go through each of those because it's 96 slides, and I don't know how much time I have got left, but I think it's not much. Can someone show me how much it is? 8 minutes? 20, okay. Anyway, so let's go quickly through them. So what can you do wrong? You can have wrong codes, you can have missing annotations, you can have relative URLs instead of absolute URLs, the missing confirmation link, you can have referencing errors in Search Console that you have to cover. You can have more than one URL per hreflang. I've already seen that happening a lot. You can have issues with combining or tagging methods, and a few more. So I'll just quickly skip through all those because we run out of time. So the wrong codes. Basically, hreflang is supposed to look like this or like that. So you can target a language or language and region. You can't target region only. You can only target both. And I've seen this happening a lot, that people are just targeting the region and it's not working all right. Yeah, and it should always look somehow like this. So it doesn't matter if you capitalize this or not, but the order of the elements has to be kept just as it is. So always language first, country second. People make this wrong often. And those are the main standards. So that's the standard for the language codes. That's the standard for country or region codes. So you can actually look them up on Wikipedia, for example. Then you can see what the correct codes are. Someone asked if there's a limit for targeting hreflang specifications on a page, because some just really have like 100 different languages or regions they want to target. There's no limit. It just depends on how much you want to bloat your code, but we'll come to that a bit later. There are tools that can assist you to, well, for example, to try out some targeting. So you make sure that you're, for example, not using -UK when you want to target Great Britain, because it's not working that way. You have to use -GB. So stuff like that happens a lot. There's another tool. It's made by Alate Solis, and it's just really good. So you can just try those tools to make sure that you got everything all right before you go to the devs and ask them to do this. Anyway, missing annotations. Some stuff is really missing sometimes, so I already covered this in a bit ago. So you've got hreflang, GB, the language is missing. It doesn't work that way. So, okay. So relative URLs, I've seen this often as well. That's a Danish saying, actually. The relatives are the worst friends, said the fox as the dogs took after him. Just to help you remember. I don't know if that helps. It helped me. You should never use relative URLs instead of absolute URLs. So that's a relative URL. That's an absolute URL. I guess you see the difference. So has any one of you migrated their websites to HTTPS recently? Can you show me your hands? Oh, is everybody sleeping? Okay. So it's not that many. Who has not yet done it? Please make sure, because you have always to make sure that the hreflang annotations are also pointing to the HTTPS version. That gets forgotten a lot of times. The missing confirmation link. Now, that was the song I was assigning to it, Mambo number 5. I see this like in 80% of all cases I have been looking at, that people forget to self-reference the URL. Those are the references we had on Go Féminine. Basically, we have to, where's this thing? This is sofeminine.co.uk, and the code is from sofeminine.co.uk. They have to self-reference themselves. So here's what it looks like. You've got sofeminine pointing to all the different versions of the page, and those have to refer back to sofeminine UK. In Search Console, let's just zoom this in. You can see, well, sorry about the quality there. You can see return tag errors. So if you've been using relative URLs, or if you've been missing the referential, the self-referential, then you're getting those issues. So yeah, you still, even if you've done everything all right, if you've been using relative URLs, you're still getting those issues. And you should not specify more than one URL per hreflang. that is just really confusing for a Googlebot. So that is utterly wrong. Just don't do that. If you're combining tagging methods, you can also make a lot of mistakes. So there are 3 methods to tag hreflang in the source code of your website. It can bloat your code if you've got a lot of languages. Instead, you can use XML sitemaps. It's very useful for large websites. And you can do this in the HTTP header, for example, for non-HTTP documents like PDFs, for example. Then you can do it via the header. If you combine those, some people might think it's a good idea, but then they have to be synchronized all the time. Most of the time, it doesn't work that way. So it can lead to misleading hreflang markup. If it's misleading, if it's not synchronized, then it gets, well, ignored. That's the worst thing that can happen. hreflang and canonical is generally not recommended. So if you've got an alternate print version of your page, then you've got 2 alternate versions of your page under the same URL. It's basically the same version. You can do that, but I would leave the hreflang. So basically, if you do it like that, so you've got website A in the United States, the UK, and for Australia, then you've got basically pretty much the same content, maybe different currencies, and you might think it's a good idea to have the canonicals from B to C. It's not a good idea. So chances are the hreflang annotations might be ignored, because basically website B and C here say, hey, Google, please index me, because I'm pointing with the hreflang to my sisters, so index those as well, and index me. Oh, wait a minute, don't index me, because the canonical page is website A. So Google might get confused and might even inherit the canonical to other pages. So it's not a good idea to do that. hreflang and no index. Well, we already make it somehow. I'm pretty confused. It's not a good idea to combine those, because then again, you're sending mixed signals, right? So you have to make sure that there's no index hiding somewhere. No index can hide somewhere, like, for example, in the HTTP header, in the HTML head, or you might have disallowed the page from crawling in the robots.txt file. It's not a good idea, because then if you're pointing with hreflang to yourself and to other pages, you want to be indexed. You can't combine it with a no index, so the no index might actually override the hreflang annotations. Last one, bad status codes. hreflang sites must not point to redirects, client errors, or server errors. So 404s, 505s, 301s, whatever. And I get that it's an issue for large websites. That was scenario 3 that we just recently covered, like at the beginning, when you've got a large website and some URLs might just be offline on another country. So you've got to find a way to handle this. For example, I don't know, you could do a cron job each night, have a cron job running, and just looking up if all versions are online, and if they're not, then just ditch the hreflang for those. So that way, they might be online for a few hours, but not all the time. And if it's like happening with, let's say, 5% of your pages, it's not a big issue. But if you have this for a long time and for a big part of your website or your URLs, then chances are your hreflang gets ignored because it's faulty. So if it's not supposed to be, that's a general rule. If it's not supposed to be in an XML sitemap, it's not suitable for an hreflang. So this applies to no index or canonicals to other pages themselves, etc. Okay, we made it, and for some reason my slide doesn't change. Yeah, that's it. We made it. And yeah, we made it on time.